beginning of where all across the Roman Empire. And so when Constantine effectively ends the Roman persecutions, the so-called red martyrdom, red for blood, of Christians becomes suddenly rare. And that would seem to us like a wholly good thing. But back then, there were a whole lot of folks who were of the opinion that if you were a red martyr, you got to go straight to heaven. And that's not a bad deal when you stop and think about it. And so the people who passionately loved the Lord and wanted to go to heaven right away, rather than toiling for 20 to 50 more years in a world without Starbucks and Netflix, were left with a conundrum. What do you do? How do you get to heaven now that I can't just go get myself eaten by a lion in the Colosseum? And so the real question arose among those folks on the bell curve, right, of deeply committed to Jesus, and then not committed at all. Those folks at the top end, where most of our saints come from, started looking around for what do we do? How do we kind of, what is the next step for us? And this created an interesting idea called white martyrdom. That is bloodless martyrdom. The idea of laying one's life down, but not necessarily in a way that ended in death. And mostly this was about embracing intense penances and about becoming a hermit. The saintly hermits, the hermetical life, became something that a lot of these very, very, kind of intense people wanted to do. You'd pray all day in whatever way seemed good to you, and then do intense penances. Same people like Simon of Stylites, we've talked about, any number of other hermits. St. Anthony of Egypt was probably the best known, and there are the so-called desert fathers that went out into the desert and basically all but starved themselves and prayed all the time in an effort to be white martyrs. Well, St. Benedict of Nurcia shows up, and this is central Italy. This is just outside of Assisi, and he intends to do the same thing, and it's about 500 AD, so it's a little later. There's an established tradition now of these saintly hermits, and he, is there as the Roman Empire is dissolving around him, right? This is 500. This is the end of the Roman Empire, which is ending with a whimper instead of a bang, and he says, hey, I'm going to go off and become the same kind of hermit and embrace this white martyrdom. The problem is that people keep knocking on his door, and he lives in a cave, but you get the idea. People keep coming to him and saying, I want your spiritual advice, and et cetera, et cetera. And he's going, listen, this is not what I signed up for. I'm trying to be a martyr here, and you people are bothering me, so go away. And so he has already kind of spent all of his money, and he's given all of his money away, and he's set up his sister for life, et cetera, and all he wants to do is be left alone, but it's not going to happen. It's not in the cards. There are too many people who are now setting up shop in the caves next door and are constantly coming over and bothering him, and so he discerns, perhaps the Lord wants me not to be a hermit after all, but to establish some kind of new shared hermit life thing. And he does his research, and it turns out that beyond his own kind of, front door, there are several people who have done something like this, St. Basil being the top of the list of those. And so St. Benedict sits down and composes a rule of life. Basically, if we're going to share this hermetical life, me and a couple of these other guys who really, really love Jesus, what does that look like? How do we go about doing that? And over the course of the first couple years, Benedict is going to compose what will become known as the Rule of St. Benedict. And the rule is designed to provide a stable life based upon prayer and physical labor that is going to allow the monk to be perfected by the Holy Spirit. So the life of perfection through stability, prayer, and labor. That is going to be Benedict's big principle. And we're going to start by thinking about what is the life of perfection. Well, it's not just about getting you to heaven or getting me to heaven. It's about a total self-giving, the idea of totality. All of life has to be ordered toward the Lord. And so we think about this as, it's not just about the end or the result. It's about every single choice along the way being perfected as well. If everything God has given us is a good gift, then the life of perfection is offering every single one of those gifts intentionally back to the Lord. The world prevents us from doing that because we have to waste time with business and perfunctory relationships and social niceties and things that ultimately cannot be sanctified, right? We could say that mowing the grass for my family is something that sanctifies because, I'm doing this for someone else or I'm doing this for my community, but there's no way to argue that balancing your checkbook is anything other than something you just have to do. And so he basically says, look, the worldly life is preventing us from real holiness. And so in order to live the life of perfection, the monk needs to separate himself, and he needs to understand that when Paul says, pray without ceasing, that we have to understand prayer in the total sense, and that we have to give ourselves entirely to this idea of giving back to God with every moment. And so we get the motto of St. Benedict, which is ora et labora, prayer and work, or prayer and physical labor. And that means that all of the monks need to work to support the prayer and the work of the entire house or the entire monastery. And so each monk has duties which are ordered toward his own perfection and toward the stability of the group or the house, which is what we call monasteries from the inside. They call it the house. And so some monks are going to pray most of the day. These are the choir monks. They're going to start about 3 to 4 a.m., according to the original rule of St. Benedict. They're going to pray matins. They're going to go till Compline at about 8 or 9 p.m. There's going to be breaks for meals. And of course, there's going to be the riposo, the holy nap, a nap that takes on a deep and profound spiritual meaning in the life of St. Benedict. The riposo matters. But the foundation of monastic prayer ultimately is the chanting of the Psalms. St. Benedict says we need to sing all 150 Psalms every day. And so we're going to have some monks who that's all they do. They are choir monks, and they're going to chant all day. There's also going to be the chanting of some of the canticles from the Old and New Testament, as well as readings of Scripture and a couple of hymns. But we don't want to think of hymns in the modern sense as songs. We want to think of them as poems that were prayers and poems at the same time. That's what a hymn kind of was in that era. And this is the origin, of course, of Gregorian chant. It's the idea of modernizing the Jewish temple chant. Incidentally, it's the chanting of psalms and scripture that led St. Augustine to say that singing is praying twice. He had no sense that singing "Morning Has Broken" is praying twice. But the idea of singing the psalms or singing these poem prayers that were called hymns at the time, those were praying twice because you were already praying. And then when you add a layer of singing onto it, St. Augustine said, clearly this is praying twice. Now, some monks, as I said, are going to do this all day. They're the choir monks. Some monks, though, are going to spend about half of the day in prayer, and then the rest of it they're going to devote to the house in terms of duties: cooking, cleaning, harvesting, working in the mill, making furniture, being the tailor, being in leadership. And then two poor, sad monks are going to have to deal with the hoi polloi. You've got the porter, who is going to sit at the gate, and he's going to be the one in charge of the keys at the porter house, from which we get the name of the stake. And we have the prior, who is the number 2 man after the abbot. These two poor, sad sacks have to deal with the real world. So they are considered kind of the two, these are unenviable positions for the monk who wants the life of perfection, because you're dealing with the hoi polloi. And so you have most of the monks are going to be ordered toward that constant prayer. Those who need to be are put into positions of work. And then we have an order. An ordo is what he called it, a structure for the day. And generally, that's going to begin with matins, which is first prayers in the deep dark well before dawn. Private masses will take place around dawn. That's followed by breakfast, which Benedict insists should be taken standing in a single dish. You get a coffee cup and you get a single dish, because we're burning daylight. We don't have time to eat and waste time here. We've got to get going. Breakfast is hasty, and then we go and chant prime, which is the first hour of the day, which is why it's called prime. And then from there, we're going to our work. The choir brothers are going to immediately begin chanting again. Everybody else is going to rush off. Benedict said, don't waste time strolling. If you have a job to do, rush to that job. The OCD people in the world love St. Benedict. And so everyone goes to their duties, and everyone has a schedule that they keep. And of course, the prior and the abbot are going to keep adjusting people. This one here needs some more work in their life. That one there needs some more prayer in their life. And so people are going to be adjusted. And then around midday, one of the priest brothers is going to offer the conventual. That is the convent, the conventual Mass, where everyone comes together, and there may be a sermon at this Mass, depending on whether the abbot likes this guy and depending upon whether the abbot has given permission for this priest to give a sermon. After the sermon, we're finally going to take the first big break of the day. We're going to go to lunch. It's going to be a slow, contemplative kind of lunch. It's taken in silence, and one brother is going to chant a spiritual book. Possibly give a long sermon, but that was very rare. More likely, he was going to read a spiritual book. In fact, the monastery I like to go to make my retreats in Oklahoma still does it this way. And my first experience of this, I had been a priest just a couple of years, and I went to this monastery, and I went to a Benedictine monastery for my schooling. And so I said, I know all about this kind of stuff. And it was delightful because we're taking lunch in silence, and there's all these secret little things, like there's a sign for if you want salt, there's a sign for a pepper, there's a sign for this, that, and the other, that's just kind of arose out of the need for, you're eating in silence, you need these little tricks. And this monk is reading in the background, and he's chanting a little bit like Kermit the Frog. And there's all these specific rules for what you do if you're reading a book that's just a book and that's not marked up for chanting. And when you go to a comma, you go down a third. And when you get to a period, you go down a fifth. And then when you have you need to take a breath, you go up. And there's all these kind of little rules for how you chant this thing. And this little guy is chanting, and he's reading this book about the conversion of King Olaf, in some Scandinavian country or whatever, and there's some priest who's talking to him, and he goes, the priest was sent by the Pope to talk to King Olaf. He was supposedly a great man, but he was also very fat. And I just about spit food out of my mouth laughing because it's so delightfully ludicrous. But this is just the way that Benedict intended it. This is how it's meant to be. And so we had this nice, wonderful lunch, which is usually several courses, and which Benedict reminds us no monk should drink more than a half bottle of wine at lunch. It's important not to overdo it. And then we have the riposo, which if you had a half bottle of wine, you're going to need. And we have a nice little nap in the middle of the day. And then the brothers are not lazy here. This is needed because, remember, we've been up since 3 or 4 in the morning at it. So we need this nap. And then after that nap, we're all going to immediately get back to work. We're going to work through into the late afternoon. And at the evening, we're going to have supper, which is going to be a little bit quicker and a little bit lighter. And then we're going to have vespers, which is evening prayer. And then depending on the day, it's going to be about 7 p.m. now, and we're going to have either a chapter meeting where the brothers are going to get together and have consultation or instruction or whatever, or there's going to be some time for private study, or there's going to be some time for socializing and fraternity, depending on the larger schedule of the house and what the abbot deems necessary. But this schedule is a big deal for Benedict. This notion of stability drives everything that Benedict is doing. Because remember, the whole purpose of this is the life of perfection. And so all of this stuff is designed to create a stable base upon which we build the life of perfection. The schedule is going to differ place to place. The strictness of the rule is going to differ place to place, depending upon what the abbot and what the brothers discern that they need in order to seek the life of perfection. And Benedict understood that. He foresaw that. He knew that if this was going to be done in Germany, it was going to look radically different than it was for central Italy. And if the Sicilians were involved, it was going to have to look different still. And so he knew that, and he said as much when he put the thing down on paper. But the Benedictine spirituality broadly demands a strict schedule and a strong structure to maintain this platform of stability that we need toward the life of perfection. And so, in terms of application to modern life as a lay person, what does the Benedictine spirituality really call for? The structure of life is certainly more doable in certain seasons of life than others. There's no reasonable way that young parents are going to be able to embrace the Benedictine spirituality. There's not enough stability. It's not the way that the world works. But generally speaking, folks who like this, folks who feel who feel like this is appealing, are almost always either single or empty nesters, right? They've established a moment of some financial stability in life. They've established a moment where their schedule is a bit more stable. And now the idea of structuring life a little more and providing a stable base upon which to build a growing spiritual life becomes appealing. The Benedictine spirituality is something that really does build on a natural disposition of stability. If you don't have a personality that lends itself to being stable, the rule of St. Benedict ain't going to help you. And certainly as a layperson, implementing something like this is not going to help. But if you're naturally inclined towards structure, then the rule of St. Benedict is increasingly and incredibly helpful in that regard. The foundations are very, very straightforward. Stability through a daily schedule oriented toward a perfection of what God is giving me and what I can return to Him, and doing that by means of a balance of prayer and labor. That's what the spirituality of St. Benedict calls for. And in fact, if you're interested in this, if this appeals in any way, the rule of St. Benedict is very, very available online for free. Certainly you can buy it from Amazon or whatever, but it is available for free, and there are probably 24 excellent books out there of the rule of St. Benedict for lay people. In fact, there is a group called the Oblates of St. Benedict, which are basically a principle, or a group that say, how do we take the principles of Benedict and apply them to our daily life? And in fact, almost all the spiritualities we talk about in this series, there's going to be some lay organization that is trying to apply those to the ordinary life in the world. But in particular, Benedict appeals to people who want stability, and it appeals to people who already have a disposition of structure and order in their life. Then he comes in and says, look, we need to make sure we have room for ora, which is the prayer, and the labora, and we need to think consciously about saying, what are the things God is giving me, and how can I then return them to God in a conscious and deliberate way, not just to get into heaven, but to sanctify each and every day, and really to try to sanctify each and every moment. That also includes a specific kind of discipline of prayer, and in particular, a discipline of prayer that allows you to pray a lot, and not just to sit down and say, I'm going to pray until I feel like I'm not praying, or just to say, 6 rosaries a day, but to say, I want to build in the liturgy of the hours. I want to build in a genuine structure of structured prayer, and something that's going to draw me to the Lord each and every day. And so it's a very, very appealing structure for certain kinds of people. It is the first, and so if this does not strike as something that feels like good for you, there are 11 more to come, and so it's a very solid chance that more than one of them will reach out and speak to you, but it's completely okay if the Benedictine spirituality does not reach out to you. For those who are listening to me in Louisiana, there is only one Benedictine monastery, sadly, in Louisiana, and that is in Covington, Louisiana, or outside of Covington in a town called St. Benedict, Louisiana, where most of the priests in Louisiana went to school at some point in the course of their studies. And so it is a wonderful place. It is possible to go to Mass there at any time. And if you are not strongly associated with your personal parish, it is worth taking the time to go down there for the Holy Week. Holy Week at St. Ben's is a remarkable situation. The Benedictines are well known for excellent liturgy, and it's a really, really cool thing to see. If you're not in Louisiana and you happen to be in the center of the United States, the monks at Clear Creek, Our Lady of the Ascension Abbey in Clear Creek outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, is a remarkable place to make a retreat and to engage with what's going on there. There is a wonderful Benedictine monastery in Mississippi, in Coleman, and of course there are plenty more around the United States, but that is going to take us a week to list off all of those and give you fun anecdotes about each one. So at any rate, that is the overview of the Benedictine spirituality. I hope this has been helpful in some way. Next time, we will dive into St. Bruno and the Carthusians, and then we'll get into the Franciscans and St. Therese and all those kinds of things. But I have been Father Ryan Humphries. This has been the CU Catecast, and we will hopefully see you again next time.